we now introduce our first guest speaker today. So far, we have Mark Dalgety from Dalgety Herbal Teas, and he's going to be talking how Mark started a herbal tea empire. Now, speakers, you have allotted times, so you have 20 minutes, Mark, and at the 15-minute mark or the 18-minute mark, you will hear a slight bell. You will hear something like this. And when you hear that, it means you must start wrapping up. If you hear that more than once, it means you must stop. So at the 18-minute mark, 2 minutes before you close, I will just play that for you to start winding up. Ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce to the platform, Mark Dalgety.
Hi, thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Alex. Like the little bang that you talk about, probably could do it after 15 minutes and then give me 5 minutes. We could just do some quick questions, I reckon. Probably even try and do the presentation in 10 minutes and then do, I think interactive questionnaire is normally very good.
Well, if you can do it in 10 minutes, man, we will definitely please you, sir. No problem. We're at your disposal.
Yes, because what I'm going to do is try and run through a series of things that we've done. Dalgety Teas, I'm the founder of Dalgety Teas. The company manufactures herbal teas, 100% natural, strong flavored herbal teas. It's actually, as of last month, October 2020, made it 25 years since we started. So we've just covered a quarter of a century in business. The business was started mainly due to an observation I'd made 25 years ago in the tea market in Europe, where they were making a lot of herbal teas. But most of the herbal teas were using a lot of artificial flavorings. And I grew up in the Caribbean where we had what we never called it herbal teas. We actually called the tea bush tea because it was simply the leaves and the plants from the trees that we were taking and putting it in a pot and boiling it. I then suddenly realized that what the Europeans were calling herbal teas was actually what we were calling bush teas. And ironically, bush tea was actually what the rural areas were using in the Caribbean. It was also actually considered the poor man's tea because that's when you use that when you couldn't buy any coffee in the nice packaged bottle or Ovaltine or Milo. Yeah. On the other hand, when it arrived in Europe now, they were calling it herbal teas, and it was actually the most expensive tea. Only the highfalutin people were drinking it. Yeah, because it had all the health benefits and the purified properties to build your immune system. So it was. I mean, I identified that opportunity 25 years ago. In terms of starting, I mean, don't actually have a few things to cover, right? So that's why I said I'm going to try and run through everything so we have a comprehensive look at how it occurred. So the first thing was identifying the opportunity. The next question was normally, how would you start a business? Most people tend to start business with a certain amount of finance they might have obtained, whether it's from family or whatever. In my situation, I actually started a business because I was broke also. I didn't actually have any money. So it's actually the back to front way of starting business. I saw the opportunity. I didn't have any money. The way I actually financed it is because at that point in time, I actually had a credit card, had about £1,000 available on it. I think the total limit was probably 1,200. I headed down to Guyana where I grew up. Bought a plane ticket, cost 500. I headed into the rural areas where my grandparents lived, and I knew there was a lot of these herbal bushes, as we would say, bush tea growing wild. I organized the first tea I'd ever developed was one called Cerasee, which people in the Caribbean use a lot for diabetes and blood pressure. Yep. So I head there and I collected about £1,000 of this bush and dried it. And luckily enough, my parents weren't in Guyana at the time. I sat in the living room and with the scissors, I cut the £1,000 of the Cerasee tea bush into 16,000 1-ounce packets. I shipped it back to England, sold it for 50 pence and earned about £8,000 over a period of about 3 months. Actually, funny enough, although I'd seen the opportunity and the tea was not in it was in loose packets, little 1-ounce packets. But then we realized that, by the way, why not I just put this stuff in the tea bags? Yeah, because at first it was being sold as a loose tea. Coming from, my background is actually engineering background. I studied chemical engineering, so I'm actually really passionate about processing and packaging and developing products from scratch. So I simply moved into the technology part of it, which is tea bagging this seriously tea. And then we began to decide, well, okay, we needed to have a family to go with it. And over the number of years, we developed different lines of teas, from the seriously to the peppermint tea, lemon and ginger, honey and ginger. We moved into moringa teas, turmeric teas. We now actually have about over 30 different lines of teas for various ailments, from diabetes, blood pressures, sleeping teas, for sleeping disorders, slimming teas. Ideally, we try to say we have a tea for any particular ailment, or for any particular, a lot to do with building the immune system. In terms of developing the teas into the market, the strategy that was used was, I would call it, was a common sense approach. I mean, 25 years, we weren't as lucky as we are now with the internet. The strategy I simply use is that first of all, I identify where I want to sell the teas. And I felt that the route of least resistance for me was to sell into the community that already knew what these teas were, which was the Black community, which was the African and the Caribbean community. So I basically went into the library. I looked at I got what you call a consensus book, and I worked out where there were all the migrant population was. So whether it is in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, and simply took the yellow pages, the telephone book, photocopied the pages that said that they have supermarkets, groceries, health food shops, and put the teas in my briefcase, and I literally went shop to shop and began selling. So that was basically how the sales route were developed. We carved out the UK into different cities. I covered the inner cities first, and then I started moving out into the pockets over a period of time, which is about a year or 2 years. Moving to the next stage, after I did my personal sales development, I then personally moved on to find wholesalers, because it reached a point whereby in any one day, you would have retailers calling you all the way from Liverpool, which is almost 300-400 miles from London. Obviously, you cannot cover that amount by yourself. So I began to develop wholesalers in each one of the regions to cover each location for me. So we end up with the wholesalers in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Leeds, Sheffield. From there, that took probably about 18 months to 2 years to do. Then eventually we realized that we wanted somebody to cover the whole United Kingdom. And then we found a distributor, which is a much larger company. A wholesaler would have been somebody who would buy 2 or 3 pallets. So then we end up finding a distributor, which is the guy who will buy 20, 30 pallets, 2 containers, 3 containers for you. And then he then began to develop supply the whole United Kingdom for us. That gave me a chance to focus a lot on manufacturing, building a proper effective factory, and also looking at export markets. So from there, we started moving into looking at export markets. Some around Europe, we went into North America. We actually began to, although we were buying the raw materials from the Caribbean, we began to export the finished product right back into the Guyanas and the Trinidades and the Jamaicas, and begin to try and build what we call a global brand on that level. With regards to getting into the big supermarket chains in the UK, we are in the big supermarket chains like Sainsbury's, Tesco, and Asda. We use the leverage that we built from the lowest end, which is the smallest grocery chain, built a reasonably strong brand, and then presented it to them. By that time, they would have actually noticed the brand. And to tell the truth, most big supermarkets, they want to work with an established product, and also they want to ensure that you've got a capacity to supply them. So that was basically the sales strategy with regards to how we moved from stage to stage in terms of developing the brand in a marketable sense. With regards to exports, I'll speak a little bit about exporting. Exporting, at that time, I had an approach that I called the unstructured approach and the structured approach. Unstructured approach was probably what you call a random situation. I'll tell you an example of that in terms of moving into USA. Using an unstructured approach, I basically spoke to my family members that were living in New York, friends and family, and found out where there were independent ethnic grocery shops across the New York state. What I did, I simply shipped 3 pallets across to New York, jumped on a flight, went over there, put the teas in my briefcase, and I literally started walking the road again. Normally in these situations, you might go through a situation of normally fear and scared. But I mean, what I basically found in myself is that once I'm selling during the course of the day and I'm going from shop to shop, I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. at the end of the day, I work with where I am and how to get back to where I'm going. So normally you go through that kind of fear, because I mean, I obviously experienced in the UK when I started doing from shop to shop selling, because a lot of times, sometimes you actually don't know where you are. But what I tend to try and ensure is that the only time I get scared is if I'm not going into a shop and I'm driving or walking around and there's no shops, then you got an issue going on there, because that means to say you're not trying to sell. So the fear is overcome by just ensuring that what you're doing is selling. So in any one day, I will try to hit at least 40 shops. If I'm beginning to walk for hours, I'll drive for hours and I'm not seeing any shops, I've got a problem, because that means it says you're now not earning any funding and it's costing you. Yep. So I've used that scenario basically moving through countries to countries. I mean, since then, I mean, that was what you call an unstructured approach. Once you've got that structure in place, then you begin to find moving into looking for wholesalers. Same system again. Look for wholesalers in the Bronx. Look for wholesalers in Brooklyn. And you start moving through the system like that. With regards to the structured approach, what you find is that in these Western countries, one of the reasons why they're successful is because they focus their economies on exporting more than importing. You can only become a successful company or a successful country by exporting more than you're importing. Once you start importing more than you're exporting, then you got an issue, right? So what they do, they would actually, they support you as a company. They have something called trade missions from the UK that go out literally almost every week to different parts of the world, where the government will actually supplement your travel, right? If they think that you are capable of going and finding an export market anywhere in the world, because they see that automatically that if your business grows and you could employ 2 or 3 people that are on the employment list, the 2 or 3 grand that they will give you, or 4 grand they will give you or support you to get that new market, right? They'll make that back in a year or less than a year if you actually take 3 or 4 people off the unemployment list. So there's this thing called the export trade missions that you can go on. And then I started using that system now to move into, I went over to Nigeria, I went into Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, right? I've even traveled back into the Caribbean, Trinidad, Barbados, using that system to find new markets. Yep. Another good thing about the structured approach, because now you're coming under the banner of, say, the United Kingdom government, what happens is that you're suddenly an official. So you normally hosted, they have a host, of a reception host at the High Commissioner office, all the heavyweight people in that country that normally you would have not been able to see if you had gone on your own. Suddenly there at that reception at the High Commissioner, and you're there suddenly meeting all the heavyweights, big CEOs of big companies there, where you could actually present your product. And they create that platform. They would actually be even the ones to actually write to these companies and say, look, Mr. Dalgety is here from Dalgety Teas. We know you're from Unilever and you do distribution here in Nigeria. Would you like to come to the High Commissioner's residence? We have a cocktail reception with cheese and wine or whatever they will use. And these guys have put on their best suits and head on there because the British High Commissioner is inviting them. Yeah. So I'm there and I'm there at my tea to sell, you know what I mean? And you start a conversation from there. So that's been a strategic way of building the business from a global point of view. You spoke a little bit about in terms of the modern way of we trying to grow. I always feel that, I mean, you spoke about digital marketing and website, or I noticed you mentioned that earlier on. Right now, what we're trying to do is really digitize our business. I always felt 25 years ago, we were in the artisan mode. Then we moved into what I call we were in an analog mode. Now we're actually moving into a digital mode where we're now trying to digitize our business to the extent whereby everything is flowing. We in terms of social media, dispatching products, a lot more sales are going online. We're now selling teas into places that we've never been to, Russia, Japan, China. Because at the end of the day, how I look at it is that we sell tea. And we don't think tea has any color. Although it's a tea that comes from a black company. Yep. So we've decided that, I mean, one of the ways that you could penetrate the whole world market is definitely moving from that analog mode into what we call a digital mode. Yep. But that's the way Dalgety is going. In terms of developing globally, we've tried in various forms from time to time using distributors. So what we've done now, we began to set up our own distribution center. So we set up our own Dalgety Ghana. We've got a Dalgety Nigeria. We're speaking to relationships in Kenya, Uganda. Ironically, I mean, some people might say there's a lot of African countries being called because, I mean, from a Dalgety point of view, we feel that, I mean, a lot of the opportunity, right, as a Black company is really in Africa because we think there's a lot of untapped situations there. The irony of the matter is that, I mean, when you go on certain flights heading to Africa, there's sometimes even more white guys on the flight than Black because they're actually making so substantial amount of money selling to the African markets. Yeah. So it's not necessary. I mean, that's just our motto. I mean, there's obviously money to be made in Europe, but then you'll find that these markets have pretty much matured. So you'll be coming up and competing against major players with not just millions of dollars, but billions and trillions of dollars. So to me personally, our company, we feel, I mean, especially I never forget when I went to Nigeria. When I went to Nigeria, I thought I was going to see a great Ade Ulu brand of teas on the shelves. And I came up, I saw Lipton tea. I couldn't believe it, you know? And I mean, I personally speaking, I think Lipton makes one of the worst teas in the world. And we actually displaced Lipton in the ethnic market in the UK. 25 years ago, there was Lipton tea in every ethnic grocery shop in the United Kingdom. Now, Dalgety tea controls there. So I'm thinking, well, I mean, if I could displace Lipton tea in the United Kingdom, in the ethnic market, then I've got a very great opportunity for the African market where I'm seeing Lipton in every single shelf, every market in those markets over there. Yep. So, I mean, that's where we are as a company. And I think what would be good is if anyone has any questions, I don't know how many minutes I've covered there in this speed presentation. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Your strategy was going from shop to begin with to get your presence out there, to get your product into the market, shop to shop. How did you tackle the mental overcoming that mental barrier to walk into a shop and just sell to someone you don't even know?
To tell the truth, the thing about it, when you, from a mental point of view, right? You know, it's like if you go to I mean, I think I developed it, it might sound a bit crazy. It's like when you go to a party years ago, you know, I mean, I don't know how the youngsters go and ask a girl for a dance any longer, right? But I think as a teenager, when we used to go to parties, you used to go and ask a girl for a dance to get a dance, okay? And I convinced myself that, I mean, if the girl doesn't want to dance with me, right? It's not, I've got a problem, she's got a problem, she's the one that lost the dance, okay? So I took that mentality towards selling tea. So if I go to the company and I try to sell them a product, and I present our tea product to them, and they don't want to buy it, I don't see it as me having a loss. I see it as them having a loss. So I'm going to say that the other person I'm going to go to, and you see, you just keep going on. And not only that, it becomes what you call a numbers game. So, I mean, good examples is like, for instance, I might eventually go to a block within a high street, and they've got 10 shops. I've got all 10 of them. Normally, you might get one of them. I always say is every 10, you get one. So I get that one shop to buy the teas. Once that one shop begins to buy teas, right, what I would normally do, the next time I go to deliver there, I park my vehicle at least 1 block away, so I walk past all the shops in the street to let them see I'm delivering to this one guy every time. And then what happens, 2 begin to buy it, okay, because then they be thinking, well, my competitor is buying from this guy. You see what I'm saying, right? So then I keep doing that until slowly but surely, you probably wouldn't always get 10, but you end up getting at least 5. Yeah, so I used to tend to use that strategy. So I wouldn't just go and park in front of the shop I'm selling to. I park in a position where I could pass with my trolley right in front of all of them slowly. I might even say, hello, how are you doing? And all this kinds of stuff, okay? Right, so they could see. But I mean, that was the mentality I had at that time.
That's amazing. That is powerful. Let me ask you one more question, Ish. So would you recommend to most people who are selling physical products to tackle the African continent, Nigeria, as you were talking about just now?
Oh, definitely, definitely, because it's so untapped. I mean, what's interesting about Nigeria? I mean, you could almost shop without even going to the supermarket. I never forget. I mean, you could be driving down the road in Lagos, sit in your car, and almost buy, you know, your beef, bread, every single thing. There's somebody standing trying to sell this stuff, you know. And I mean, the irony of the matter is that when you look at all these products that are sold in this market, it comes from everywhere except Nigeria or from any other black country. It's coming from China, Japan, England, America, and a lot of it is not even very good quality product. because a lot of time these guys send their poor quality products to these places. And then there's another scenario. Sometimes, I mean, if you think of the palate, right, especially at least from a food point of view, the palate of the average black person versus a Chinese or a Chinese, a white, and an Indian, okay? We tend to like stuff in a bit more flavor, okay? White people tend to have a very placid palate, okay? So what you tend to find is that you have these guys making stuff for us, and they're just making stuff because they think this is what we might like. And it's not always 100%. Yeah, so we actually know what we want. That's why Dalgety was so successful, because when we make our teas, people say they smell the tea before they even buy it. You know, when they just, you put Dalgety teas in your cupboard, it smells the whole kitchen up. Because when we say ginger, we mean ginger. I mean, the ginger is born in your chest. When we say peppermint, you feel as though you're sucking a peppermint, okay? I mean, we don't focus on all this fancy pyramid tea bag and you have all the fancy designs, but the product don't taste good. If you think about a black person, if they want to go into, if you want to impress a black person with food, make it taste good, put a lot of the food in the plate, and they're happy. Forget about all the fancy French styles, and you design you have a big plate, a little small amount of food, and loads of designs around it, and it doesn't taste good. We're not happy. Yeah, we prefer to have a basic plate with a good quality tasting food and loads of food in the goddamn plate. I'm afraid, at least that's how I look at it.
Wow, amazing. Any more questions? Any more questions? One more question. Mr. Dalgety has used his time wisely, and he's foregone his time to speak and allowed you to ask a question. So one more question out there. Anyone asking a question?
Hey, yeah. Yeah, Timothy speaking here. Hey, Mark. Lovely insight on the growth of Dalgety. I just really wanted to ask about, what was it like for your barrier to entry for distribution within Europe?
The barrier for entry. Oops, I seem to have disappeared here. Hold on a second. The barrier for entry.
Yeah. So, being able to have your products selling, ASDAs, for example.
The barrier, well, okay, to tell the truth, how it started there, this first time we presented a product to the multiple supermarkets, the first thing they said is no. In those days, what I actually simply did is, I, in terms of perseverance, began to visit independent small Tesco supermarkets. And speaking to the manager and said, hey, what do you think of these products? Do you think this could sell? Now, some of the managers already knew the product because they obviously look and see what the independents were doing. So, but then he said, well, I'm not responsible for buying. Yeah, that responsibility is the buyer at the head office. So I'm like, well, okay, would you endorse it? Would you speak to the buyer for me? And some of them said, yes, I can, but I can't really make that decision. Okay. So I took their name, right? And I asked them to speak to the buyer at the head office. I think I managed to get about 15 or 20 guys in various parts of London, especially the high-ethnic areas, to endorse the product. Then I spoke to the buyer, right? And then I presented the product to the buyer. The buyer said no. Then we said, well, by the way, look, this guy here, Mr. Smith, John, this, whoever it is in Tottenham, they said that they would love to have the product themselves. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. So eventually when they spoke to the person, said, well, I mean, I can understand you getting 2 or 3 persons to endorse your product. When you've got 10 guys saying, well, this is a product that should be on the Tesco shelves, I think we give it a try. But then even then it was 100% in, because then he said, okay, well, we give you a try. Yeah. Just bring one product and we'll try and list that one product. And Mr. Dalgety, we give you that one product for 3 months. And after that, if it doesn't sell, please don't call us again and molest us. Yep. Yeah. And interestingly, in those days, in the second month, the buyer called me and said, Mr. Dalgety, what else are you selling? Because the teas had done so well. Yeah. But that was my strategy in those days. I mean, I mean, there might be a different strategy now. So I could only tell you what I had done to manage to get it. And then obviously once you got it into Tesco's, then I was walking around shouting to Sainsbury, hey, look, Tesco's is selling the teas. Well, how come you don't have it? Then you got Sainsbury began selling. You got to ask the Sainsbury, Tesco's, and ask the Tesco's and Sainsbury. And they're like, what? Okay, that's something we need to do. So you use that carrot and stick scenario.
Right.
But that was our strategy in those days.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Timothy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalgety. Amazing strategy for conquering the world with the Dalgety brand. Amazing strategy.
Yes, thank you. Oh, let me just for some people to look. This is one of our packaging, which is lemon and ginger, right? And our new slogan now, quickly to say, it's all in the Corona days, build your immune system. So we've gone to another level now, okay? Before we were just selling healthy teas, now we're telling you teas to build your immune system in the current Corona environment.
Okay, let me just give you one advert there. Can you just bring up that picture on the screen again? And we'll take a picture for social media. Yeah, bring up that picture once again. Up a bit more. Brilliant. Brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Dalgety.
Yep, thank you. And you can get our teas on www.dalgety.co. Just Dalgety, DALGETY.co.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing what you're doing, sir. Amazing.